Thanks very much, and thank you very much for the opportunity to come and speak again today. Let's try to get that. Thank you. I really want to speak sort of essentially in two parts. One is to talk about the international context for global trade, and particularly for your sector, where I think there are some emerging challenges to think about. And then second, I want to give some examples of the kinds of things that we're doing in our trade strategy. And essentially, our trade strategy is in three parts. It is about rules and responding in a very relatively orthodox way to the challenges we face out there, negotiating more trade agreements, trying to improve access, including for the horticulture sector out in the world. The second is resilience. So something that we've started talking about much more as a consequence of COVID, but how are we doing that in the trade side, and how are we thinking about that, and why does that matter to you in the sector? So if you think about things like fuel, about fertilizer, we're having to think differently about how we use these trade agreements to drive that security of supply as well. And the third area for our trade policy is innovation, trying some new things, taking some risks, and leaning in on particular areas of work that we see that in the future, if not immediately, will deliver benefits for New Zealand exporters, including, of course, your sector. Let me start, though, by kind of sketching the world as we see it from where we're sitting, at least in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And I think to separate that into two distinct parts. The first is the geopolitics. And geopolitics has roared back for New Zealand. If you think about the tensions between the US and China, if you think about the hot wars underway, both in the Middle East and, of course, still in Ukraine and Russia, and the way in which those are impacting on trade. So quite apart from the social and the kind of moral challenges there, the impact on trade has been very significant indeed, and you just need to look at your petrol price to see an indication of how that bears down on all of the economy. But for your sector in particular, of course, the supply chain challenges that have emerged that are, in a way, are a bit of a refreshing reminder of what we faced during COVID, and now we're facing them again. And I would argue that as you look out into the future, we do need to be prepared and to be focused much more on resilience and thinking about how that needs to be undertaken in an international context, so that the supply chains, the value chains that you rely on and you develop and you export out can be sustained. The second big feature of that international context, of course, in the trade policy sense, is the rise of protectionism. And protectionism is well and truly back. I think there was a brief period when someone like me could be optimistic and say that actually protectionism is reducing. The future is looking good for agricultural exporters, including, of course, yourselves. Unfortunately, it's not possible to be quite so optimistic anymore. It was only 5 or 6 years ago you could say that tariffs, non-tariff measures were declining. You can't say that anymore. They're clearly on the increase, and many economies are finding ways to protect their sectors, to keep out competition in new and interesting and novel ways that we haven't had to deal with previously, but are clearly going to need to grapple with this time. I think the other big challenge that we face is that the 4 major trading blocs and key trading partners of New Zealand, including for your sector, US, China, India, and the European Union, all 4 of those are now exhibiting signs of the contagion effect of the activities of the United States, are certainly having an impact on those other economies. So if you see, for example, the United States, America first, Make America Great Again, just last week, a 12.5% tariff imposed on New Zealand. So plenty of challenges and uncertainty coming out of a really vital market for New Zealand. And then there's China. China too has a focus now, an increasing focus on food security. And who would bet against China finding ways to do that, given what they've done in the manufacturing and the information technology sphere? When China doubles down and leans in on a sector, it is very committed to growing that, and I think that is one of the things we're going to have to grapple with, is that over the next 5 to 10 years, what will demand look like from what has been a vital market for the horticulture industry? The The third area of challenge, of course, is the European Union. With China and with the EU, of course, we have free trade agreements, and they give us a certain stability and access to those critical markets. But the EU too, with its war on the border between Ukraine and Russia, the challenges it faces as well through the closure of the Straits of Hormuz, they too are now thinking of what they call strategic autonomy and finding ways to ensure their own food security, to increase protectionism for their agriculture sector, lowering global prices, and therefore having an impact again on the New Zealand export trend. And then there's India, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about India because I was asked to speak about the free trade agreement that we've concluded there. And I think the important thing there is that we've now got some certainty of access into India that we certainly didn't have before. But India too has its own protectionist policies, calls it Make in India. It too wants to have self-sufficiency and food security, and that too has implications as we think about our position in these key markets, India, EU, United States, China, as we look out over the next 5 to 10 years. So those two things, geopolitics and protectionism combined, for me, suggest, number one, the jungle's growing back. Number two, there is going to be disorder and uncertainty in the world. And less than a fortnight ago, Minister Macleay hosted 19 countries and 2 invited ministers from Fiji and Samoa. The countries that he invited that attended included the minister from Korea, from Thailand, from Malaysia, Norway, Switzerland, Rwanda, Uruguay, Costa Rica, Chile. So a whole group of countries that came together. And one of the presentations that the minister made was to talk about uncertainty and the challenge that small countries face externally. And we just finished this analysis that we've done together with the OECD, which should become a public document very soon, but the minister did speak about it, and I know it's been picked up in the media already. The analysis tells us that a 1% increase in trade policy uncertainty, in uncertainty of access out there in the world, is the equivalent of a 4% additional tariff on New Zealand exporters. And that OECD report concludes that we are seeing uncertainty in the range of between 10 and 20%. So you think about 10% times 4, or we're still 20% times 4, and that gives you a quantum of the challenge that you face as exporters out there because of the uncertainty and the disorder that we're seeing in that international trading system, in those markets that we really do depend on for incomes, for jobs, and of course to drive productivity at home. But that's not a counsel for despair. In fact, I believe that there are very significant opportunities out there for New Zealand, particularly and because of the disorder that is out there. Because people are going to want even more safe, sustainable sources of food, of products, of horticulture, and that represents an enormous opportunity for us to position ourselves internationally as the preferred source for precisely that safe, sustainable food source. But we have to be very thoughtful and structured about the way in which we think about that in the world. And that brings me to the India free trade. I'm going to move through these slides relatively quickly because I really want to come to the trade policy strategy that I spoke about at the start: rules, resilience, and innovation. But the India Free Trade Agreement is an example of what we're trying to do in the rules space. It is about trying to ensure that you have certainty of access into the Indian market as a sector. And as a sector, the horticulture industry faces a 33% tariff into the Indian market. And we need the Indian market for essentially those 4 reasons up there: to catch up with our competitors. So Australia has had a free trade agreement for 3 years already with India. Peru, Chile, Costa Rica, a whole range of horticultural exporters are also negotiating with India. So not only do we need to catch up, we need to have an advantage in the market. We need to have access. And we need to have access not to the 1.4 billion Indians, we need to have access to the middle class in India. That's the target. And the middle class in India is 700 million people. That is larger than the entire population of the European Union and larger than the entire population of the 10 ASEAN countries. We also need rules. We do need that certainty, and I do keep coming back to the point that what we're trying to do with these trade agreements is ease out and mitigate the uncertainty that we see out in that world, and these very orthodox trade agreements are an attempt to do that. I want to now give you a quick flavour of why it matters for us as an economy, and sheep meat is a great example. We used to account for 85% of India's imports. We now account for less than 10%. Cannot compete with our competitors when we're paying the 33% tariff on sheep meat and they are at zero. It is simply not a sustainable position. Wine, a colossal tariff, 150% tariff. We've got a reduction. All we've done is essentially catch up with Australia. But crucially, what we've done in the free trade agreement is also ensure that what the EU got, which was a modest improvement on what we in Australia were able to get from India, that we will automatically get the same treatment as the European Union. That only happens, of course, if we ratify our agreement before the European Union and India ratify their agreement. So there is an urgency to this as well. Here's the horticulture outcome. Kiwi fruit and apples. I had an opportunity to speak to Apples and Pears conference last week. And I trust for you as a sector, this is well known. The 33% tariff has been eliminated, and these are phased reductions. And one thing I did want to make the point to you, the value of ratifying the agreement this year has real meaning to the sector. If we can, let's say we can bring the agreement to enter into force sometime in October, we will then get 2 tariff cuts, one in October for when the agreement enters into force, and we will get the second tariff cut on the 1st of January next year. That's also material for the kiwi fruit and apples industry because they will get 2 quota increases in the space of, 3 to 4 months. So again, the need to get this into force and to catch up with our competitors is a really crucial element of the work that we're doing at the moment. Manuka honey, we are the only country. The EU didn't get any honey access. We are the only country that has access, and I've used that because of the pollination between the horticulture industry and Manuka honey, but also to make the point that, again, 66% tariff. That is a colossal wall to try to climb over. But if you can get it down to 16.5, while all of your competitors are still paying 66, I would argue that is something worth looking at, taking another look at the Indian market. The Indian market is the largest seafood market in the world, according to the World Bank. We are, again, not able to compete in the market when Australia has not paying a 33% tariff and we are paying the 33% tariff. We eliminate that tariff, we catch up to the Australians, and then we also have an advantage over some of our other seafood competitors in the market. Forestry, the same, 119% increase in Australian exports, nearly a 20% decline in ours. Again, not sustainable to compete against our key competitors in the Indian market if we're paying these high tariffs. Dairy, be open with you about the fact that this was a disappointing result, that this was frustrating. But we did get something, but certainly not as much as we had hoped. India, of course, has not given any dairy access to any country that it has negotiated a free trade agreement with, including the European Union, and we understand the United States as well. A couple of important elements, though, to bear in mind for the dairy industry is there is a legal obligation on the part of India to talk to us if it ever gave access to anyone else, and we are tariff-free for processing in India so long as the product then gets exported by the Indian manufacturer out of the Indian market. So we're getting a foothold into the market that we hope to build on over the coming period. It's not just about the market access. There are practical things that the agreement does for exporters. At the moment, it takes between 4 and 7 days to clear Indian customs. There is now a legal obligation here to clear customs for New Zealand product, something the Australians, for example, do not have, a legal obligation on the part of Indian customs authorities and indeed New Zealand customs authorities to clear New Zealand product within 48 hours and perishable products within 24 hours. So again, a practical advantage of what this free trade agreement does, what these new rules give you in terms of the certainty of access into the market. So to come back to the strategy, the rules, I hope I've given you an example of the rules that we try to negotiate and the certainty that they can create for you in this very important new market for New Zealand. I would argue it is a new market because previously with tariffs of 150% and 33%, it was genuinely tough to do business there. Not suggesting it's now going to be easy, but at least the tariff now equalises, levels the playing field for New Zealand exporters with some of your competitors, but actually gives you an advantage in the market as well. The second plank of the strategy, or the second pillar of the strategy, is resilience. We are having to think about trade policy and trade agreements in different ways than we are used to. And Exhibit A is the agreement on trade and essential supplies that was struck with Singapore, which essentially is about New Zealand and Singapore waiving our WTO right to impose export restrictions in the time of a crisis. And essentially what we're committing is we will not prevent the export of food to Singapore, and there's a list of products publicly available on our website of what those are. We will not prevent the export of those to Singapore, and Singapore in return will not impose export restrictions on products like fuels, chemicals, fertilizers, and so on, sort of key elements or inputs, including for the horticulture sector here in New Zealand. So we are having to think about that in our agreements, our trade negotiations in different ways, but it is about securing supply so that the export sectors can continue to grow and expand and service the demand that we're seeing internationally. When Minister Macleay hosted the 19 countries that joined him in Auckland, one of the outcomes of that agreement, of that meeting, was a declaration on supply chains, a commitment by those 19 countries to work together to support one another in practical ways, and also to look at how the 19 members might consider joining the agreement on trade and essential supplies that we negotiated with Singapore. So trying to get treaty-level commitments from other members, other small and medium-sized countries, although Korea is a G20 member, trying to get those countries to see that we work best together when we guarantee each other supply, whether it's food, fuel, other inputs for exporting. Again, it's about trying to secure that certainty. Let me close then on the innovation piece. This is where we need to take some risks. So one of the risks we took was to invite these 19 ministers to come to New Zealand to join Minister Macleay in Auckland and bring them together to develop some approaches to the supply chains issues we face, to digital trade. So there was an outcome on digital trade to recognise each other's documentation digitally. An obvious thing to do, but none of us are able to do it. It requires, for all of the 19, it requires some legislative changes to ensure that we can recognise something that appears digitally as a legal document, whether it's your sanitary and phytosanitary standard, whether it's your bill of lading, your ability to fulfil the rules of origin in order to get a tariff preference, practical things again that will deliver more certainty and transparency for businesses. And we estimate that if we can do this, it will cut between 10 and 15% of your cost of doing business internationally. And the other deliverable, one of these innovations that we've introduced, is this agreement that was signed when Minister Macleay was meeting with his ministerial colleagues in Auckland, an agreement to work together to push back against non-tariff barriers. Tariffs in many ways are a simple thing to address because they're visible, they're transparent, and you can identify them. But the non-tariff barriers, the more challenging and opaque measures, when countries change packaging requirements on you 24 hours before they know that you're about to ship to them, when they change the rules on environmental standards, no science behind it, but another non-tariff measure designed to try to keep New Zealand exporters out of the market. And we know from an NZIER study that those kinds of barriers are costing us between $20 and $30 billion a year just for the agriculture sector alone. So there's real money tied up in finding ways to push back against these very challenging measures. Also in the innovation space, last year the Prime Minister relaunched the idea of an EU CPTPP dialogue, block to block. That is now developing into the possibility of a digital trade agreement between the CPTPP countries and the European Union. Roughly 55 to 60% of global trade flows in the digital space are happening between those members. The 13, now 13 with Costa Rica, CPTPP members, plus the 27 members of the European Union. So I'm going to now conclude in a world that is increasingly disordered and challenging for New Zealand exporters, where we are seeing the rise of trade uncertainty, which is the equivalent, a 1% rise, remember, is the equivalent of a 4% tariff on your exports. What we're trying to do with our trade strategy, the rules, resilience and innovation piece, is try to mitigate that uncertainty as much as we can, acknowledging that we are a small country, but nevertheless that we have agency to try to drive and shift the opportunity for us internationally. So thank you very much. And my last slide is very much aimed to all of you, which is please get in touch. We are here to help. I know I used the lame Ronald Reagan joke, the 10 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. But I hope you see there that we really are, and that it's a cross-agency effort. I do want to emphasise this is not MFAT, this is MPI, it is Customs, it is NZTE, it is all of us working together to try to deliver and maximise the benefit, not just of the agreements that we've negotiated, but to support you in those international markets. If there's one thing you do today, do please subscribe to the Market Intelligence Reports. They are a great and easy read. Every 2 weeks you'll get a macroeconomic update, 1 to 2 pages long. It will also have regular updates on what's happening where the greatest uncertainty at the moment is in terms of US trade policy as well. So please, that's your taxpayer dollar at work. It is free to you, and they are a quick and easy read. They pop regularly into your inbox, and we welcome feedback on those as well, both critical and we love positive feedback too. So thank you very much. I hope I've given you a sense there what the strategy is, rules, resilience, innovation, and that we have an absolute determination to support you as a sector to continue to grow as you are already doing. Thank you.